It's weird saying that I loved this book and that it's one of the best reads of the year because of the subject matter, but it really is. Hey there, my name is Emily and welcome to my channel. I make bookish and writing content here on YouTube. Today, we're going to be talking about this book, Beartown. This book by Fredrik Backman, I feel like with every Backman book I read, I appreciate his work a little bit more. There's this sort of like quiet intimacy in each of his books with his characters that he writes, and it took me a while to like get into his writing and his work, but now that I'm into it, I have absolutely fallen in love with it. I feel so connected to the story and the characters and their personal lives, and they really just feel very real. This is Beartown. Beartown is the third Fredrik Backman book that I've read. I've also read Anxious People and A Man Called Ova, and Anxious People was the first book by him I read, like right after it came out. Everyone was talking about it. I enjoyed it when I read it, but it was not like my favorite book ever. I don't know what I was expecting going into it. It just like didn't itch that part of my brain when I read it. And then I read A Man Called Ova on Hugo's recommendation and loved it. I thought it was so good. I cried. And now I have finally read Beartown, that's this book. And this is a trilogy, actually. I have the second book that I'm hoping to read soon. But there's a new HBO series coming out soon with this, so I thought I would talk about it. This book felt very, very different than his other books, at least to me. That might be just me. I'm gonna start this video with a spoiler-free section, and then I'll let you know when we're heading into spoilers, because I feel like it's not necessarily a book where the less you know, the better it is, because I knew what was happening in this book, and I still was very invested, and it definitely still felt like it didn't ruin any part of the book for me to know what happens, but I think maybe if you don't know, it could be more impactful in some way. I'm not sure. So what is Beartown? What is Beartown? Where is Beartown? Well, Beartown is a fictional town set in Sweden, and it is a very small, tight-knit town, and the only thing that really keeps the town together is everybody's love for hockey. Now, side note here, I know very little about hockey. I have family members who played hockey. I've been to a couple games. It's not my favorite thing. I'm not a very sporty person. I know that you hit the puck into the net, the goal, and like it gets pretty violent. There's lots of shoving and stuff like that, and you play it on ice. That's what I know. But even with my very limited knowledge and understanding of the sport, I really had no issue understanding the book. But if you are like adamantly opposed to hockey, or like you just for whatever reason have zero interest in it, just know that it's very involved in this book. But I feel like the sport is a character in and of itself, and the town, Beartown, is also a character in and of itself in a way. It's an important asset, but having knowledge of hockey, I don't think is as important because I was fine. If you understand how like the basics of any sport works, you get it. You're there. Don't worry about that if you're not a hockey lover, but if you love hockey, maybe that's something that makes you like this book even more. I'm not sure. So in this book, and I'm not going to go into specifics because we're in the spoiler-free section, something very, very terrible happens in this very tight-knit town, and it kind of divides everyone. And it starts what is basically a war within the community. People are picking sides about it. It's kind of tearing the town apart in a way. First, I want to talk about all the things I loved about this book. Number one is the characters. Every single character in this book is very real. It feels real. This place feels real. I feel like I know these people. I feel like I have met people that are exactly like these people. Like that's how real they felt to me. And by the end, I felt like I was a part of the community in a way. Living in a world, fighting alongside them, and like it just felt very, I don't even know how else to say it. I felt like I was in it. And I will warn you that because this book deals with such heavy subject matter, sometimes that was really draining. And I read this book very fast. I could not put it down. I think because of that, it ended up draining me emotionally a lot because of how heavy the subject matter is. But like it was just so visceral for me. I think another part that made it even more interesting for me is that we don't focus on just the children in the town or just the adults. You know, it's not like a teenager high school book. And it's not just an adult contemporary novel. Like I would say that this leans more adult contemporary or contemporary fiction versus something like YA. I definitely don't think this is where that belongs, but we do get to see the perspective of the young people and of the older people in the community. And I think because of their varying opinions on things in the town and their history with the town, it gives us a multi-perspective view of the situation and everything going on, for better or for worse. What Backman kind of did with this book is he took a community, and we get to be within the different households of the community. So we see the director of the hockey stadium place. We get to follow the coaches. We get to follow the players and their families. We get to follow the daughter of the director of the hockey facility. We get to meet the woman who owns the local bar. Everyone kind of gets to have a moment where we get to experience this world through their life and how what's happening in the book is affecting them. And everyone in their own way is important in the telling of this story. And they all have their own part to play in the story. I also love that he didn't shy away from the issues being faced in this book. I feel like a lot of the times when authors have something to say, they get to the point and then they back off. They get to the point, they say what they want to say, and then they're like, but I don't want to push it too far. I understand where that's coming from, but what I really appreciated in this book is that Backman took the issues that he wants to talk about in this book and he faces them head on, and he doesn't glaze over it at all. He is having us bear witness to, he's having us witness up front with the characters what is happening to them and how it's affecting them and what it is doing to this town. And we have to face their inner demons with them. We face our own inner demons and our own prejudices as the characters are grappling and facing theirs and overcoming or working through what they are doing or dealing with the consequences of their own actions. And I will say some of the stuff in this, the stuff that happens that is really bad, Backman doesn't condone. I don't think that when we see a perspective from the antagonist's point of view, I don't think you're ever really supposed to feel sympathy for them. I think he does a good job of being like, no, this is wrong. But we still get to have that perspective, even if just for a minute. There's also some very illicit feminine rage in this book, which is very interesting. One of the topics discussed in this book, kind of one of the themes even, is rage and anger. And we see a lot of anger from the men in this book, particularly the young boys on the hockey team. But we also get to see some of the women express their rage and how that goes against the grain of the town. And I'm talking full-on screaming, shouting, running into the street, anger, violent anger from the women. There's something so visceral about it because of the situations that they've found themselves in. And I could feel it deep in my blood. I felt how they were feeling. I knew exactly what they were feeling in that moment. And to see them be able to express that rage through the page, I was sobbing through that whole section. And I've never really had it that intensely before, where it felt like something ancient inside me awoke. And with that, how real everything in this book felt, the situations, the people, the conversations, the community. The book, I would say, has a plot, obviously. We are going from point A to point B, the whole book. There is a progression of the story. However, I do think that the bulk of the story is in the characters. And that is a theme I see in all of his books that I've read so far, that the important part of the story that we're following is the journey of the characters, not so much the plot that's happening. Even with that, even with it being so character driven, I could not put this book down because I could not stop thinking about it. I needed to know how the issues were going to be resolved. I needed to understand what was happening and how things were going to end up. That is very rare for me with character driven novels. So I would say that was something he did really, really well. Moving on to things that I didn't love. Sometimes when talking about the major issues or harder subjects in the book, I think sometimes Backman's narrator is a little bit too on the nose speaking about it. And it's more it's more that the language, the verbiage that he uses, like took me out of the moment versus like what he was saying, if that makes sense. I agreed with what the narrator was saying and getting at, but sometimes reading the book, it just took me out of the moment. Not like, the narrator wasn't like preachy. I didn't feel like I was being preached at necessarily about these issues, but there were just like a couple moments where I was just like, okay, I get it. I get what you're saying. You don't need to tell me straight out. It only happened like 3 or 4 times at most, and it didn't bother me too much, but I know some people really don't like that. In some moments, it made what the characters were doing fall flat because instead of letting the reader kind of read into it and understand what the narrator was trying to say, the narrator just like told them. So a little bit less show, more telly in those moments. And I'm also pretty sure this is a translation. So like it could also just be a translating thing. I don't really know. So I'm not going to like say anything for sure, but just like a couple moments like that kind of pulled me out of it, but like never to a point where I was like, ugh, I can't do this anymore. The next thing I would say is that the book starts a little bit slow. It takes, oh my gosh, I'm pretty sure like the moment that they're talking about, the big moment that happens in this book that sets off everything else for the rest of the story, I'm pretty sure takes like a couple hundred pages to get to, like 100 pages or something. But like before that, we're meeting all the characters, we're like understanding their world, we're meeting the town basically. And I was really glad that we got to meet them and understand them, because then when the aftermath and everything else happens, like we already kind of have a feel for what's happening in the town and how everyone interacts with each other, but it was just a little bit too slow for me. So definitely a bit of a slow burn in the beginning, but then like once it kind of takes off, it goes. But that's pretty much it for things that I really disliked about this book. I will say that this book was very draining for me to read. It was a little bit cathartic because I was like sobbing along with the characters. And I'm pretty sure after I finished reading this, I stared at the wall for about 30 minutes trying to figure out my feelings about this book and like what it did to me and the experience I had while I was reading it. I finished it super fast. I read like 80% of it in just one day because I just couldn't stop reading it. And I do think that fed into how I felt about this book, that it was so draining for me because it was so emotional the whole time. And like I felt very sensitive to the topics that were being talked about in this book. And so I think that with those things, like it really took a lot out for me emotionally. I don't even want to say too much, but like check your triggers for this book, I suppose, if you're worried that you have them, because this is a very emotionally taxing book in some ways, especially if you're someone who relates to what the characters are going through. But I do think that Backman handled the sensitive topics with a lot of grace and understanding. Most of the negative reviews about this book say that it's very cliche, that the characters are too cliche, and that they all are kind of like archetypes of like things that like you recognize. But I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing. I think that Backman did that on purpose because you want to understand and recognize these characters and their place within the town. And so if you have like the star jock, you know exactly what he's like because that is a familiar person. You have the kooky best friend and you know exactly what she's about. It helps you as the reader have a grasp and understanding of these characters, even if it's subconsciously, so that when things go down, you kind of already have like this connection with them. And yeah, in some ways it does make them a little bit cliche, but I do think that the way that Backman handles the situations and the relationships between the characters, I do think he does that in his own way. Overall, I really loved this book. It's weird saying that I loved it so much because of the subject matter in it, but this might be my new favorite Backman book, and I'm for sure going to continue the series. I'm going to be moving into the spoiler section of this video, so if you do not want spoilers about Beartown by Fredrik Backman, please stop the video here. You've been warned. Also, moving into this next portion of the video, I am going to talk about the big event that happens, and so I have some content warnings that I'm going to put on the screen for you. So, the big event. I'm going to not explicitly state a lot of the things because I think it gets flagged as inappropriate, but know that I'm not trying to make light of the situation in any way. So just a heads up there. I will say it was a rough scene to read. I'm not going to lie about that, but I think that Backman handled the big event well. Basically, if you haven't read the book, hi, welcome to the spoiler section of this video. Basically, the star hockey player Kevin forces himself onto Maya, who is the 15-year-old daughter of the, I believe, director of the hockey stadium. And it's after they won this big, really important, I think like the semifinals match. When Maya decides to tell her family about what happened to her, her parents decide to take action and Kevin gets taken off the team for the final match. So the scene itself, when it happens, was really hard to read. It wasn't super graphic in detail. It's not written in first person. We weren't, and you know what? I really appreciated that. He gave us just enough to fill in the blanks, but without, it was one of the moments where I'm really glad an author just told me instead of showed me in some ways. And I think he did a good job approaching it without giving us too much of it. I don't know if that makes sense, but like, it was a lot at the same time. What I also appreciated is that he went in depth into how Maya was feeling after, how it affected her mentally, physically. I thought it was a really realistic rendition of how someone would cope with something like that happening to them. And seeing how apathetic Kevin was, thinking that he didn't even do anything wrong because the whole town's in love with him. He was so used to the town and the people worshiping him that he thought he could do no wrong. And when the news breaks about this happening because Maya and her family take action against him, the entire town basically rallies behind Kevin, saying that she's doing it for attention, that they were doing it to get Kevin booted off the team. And because he's the star player, they need him in the final match to win the game and win the finals, which is like really important for the town because it's going to bring in a lot of revenue for them. And so they think that this was like some plan by Maya and her family. She gets called horrible names, mocked, ridiculed. They vandalize her car. People throw bricks in her window. And you know what? It's a very plausible situation. This is the reality of what happens when people come forward about something like this. And, people always say like, oh, that's not true. It never happens. It happens all the time. People come forward about something that happens to them and people victim blame and shame. And honestly, seeing it put out like that on the page was like, it was hard to watch, but I was like so grateful that there was like a realistic rendition of this being told in a way that was very real. A character I really loved in the book was Amat. I think that's how you say his name. I'm not 100% sure. His story was really moving for me as well. His situation with his mom and him. Basically, Amat is in love with Maya and he's also on the team and he's smaller than the other boys. And he isn't sure that he can keep up with them because they're big and strong, but he's really fast. And I love that it was such an important part of the story. And about how he witnessed what happened to Maya and Kevin's family tried to blackmail him to keep him quiet by like offering his mom a better job and money. Just his whole everything with him, his arc, I really loved it. And I'm so glad that something like that was also included. He was one of my favorite characters. And then we have Benji, who I thought was also a really complex character. He does fall into that archetype of like the closeted athlete that like jokes and bullies with the other jocks because they're in the closet. But I do think that his character brought a bit more depth than just being a trope like that. We got a lot more depth from him than we do normally when we see these kinds of characters. I like that we got to see him both in moments where he was on the team with the other boys and how he has to navigate those social interactions with them. But then also when he's on his own, when he's with his family, when he's out and about doing other things, we get to experience that side of him with him as well. And Backman also brings up the whole concept of locker room talk and how inappropriate it is and how wrong it is. And like one of the people we follow is like their coach and he's like, oh my God, I can't believe I said all those things and this whole time he was gay. And it's like, yeah, dude, like maybe we shouldn't be making jokes like that. And I like that Backman, he puts responsibility on the adults as much as he puts it on the children. Like, yeah, they shouldn't be speaking like that, but it is up to the people who are in charge of them, who are helping them navigate being teenagers, who are helping them become adults in our world. It is on you to teach young men in particular, in this case, it is on you to teach them how to act appropriately and kind to other people. Because you can do severe harm to others. And I mean, it's interesting because Backman kind of takes on all these different issues and he executes them all really well. And I think he tackled a lot of things in this book. He tried to take on a lot of issues in one story, but they're all so interwoven that he did such a great job making it all make sense and like it all fit together very well. You'd think it would be really confusing or hard to follow, or that like he would be maybe taking on too much, but I never felt that way when I was reading it. And if anything, having these different topics being approached helped enhance all the different layers happening in this book. And I really like that he talks about how like we encourage particularly young men, young boys, to be aggressive, to take what they want, to be leaders. When you're playing hockey, be aggressive. Don't let them take the puck away from you. Train harder, train better. And they push these young boys to do that. They are in training every single day, hours a day, bleeding, concussed, whatever. And I think like that's why I think hockey is a character in this book, because hockey itself kind of takes on this shape of like pushing them to be more aggressive, and how that is causing harm to them physically and mentally, and also harming their relationships with the other people in their lives. And how when you treat people like gods, they end up thinking that they're unstoppable and that they can do and take and be whatever they want. And you end up condoning violence against people, and how dangerous that becomes if you don't stop it and if you don't realize what you're doing, and how we are responsible as people to be good to other people. This kind of contrasts with Maya's mom, Kira, who's a very successful lawyer who works in like the town over, and how she as a woman is seen as kind of an outcast in the community because she's not the biggest hockey fan. She doesn't want to stay at home and be a stay-at-home mom in a more traditional role. She's a leader. She's outspoken. She's more outspoken than her husband is, and how she is kind of ostracized from the community for being like that. And Maya at one point says something similar where she's like, women are supposed to be silent and just support the team and be there for them at the games and be their biggest fans and do whatever they want. But like, women are never allowed to be on the team. We don't even have a women's hockey team. We're required to be separate. And that's one of the moments where like sometimes it seems a little bit on the nose, but also he's right. So I don't know. Like everything that he said was so relatable and like rang so true in my life and what it was like for me in high school and growing up in those ways. Like, it just was so relatable. I like had no issue anytime he pointed out stuff like that, even if it was done in a way that was like a little bit too on the nose. What I appreciate at the same time is that he doesn't allow there to be any sort of like shades of gray. He is calling out the problems rather than just alluding to them and letting the reader just like figure it out. He's like, no, this is right and this is wrong. There is no gray area. And it's the same thing with the big event with Maya and Kevin, where there's no gray area about what happened. It is very clear what happened. You as the reader are not left in the dark. He doesn't let there be any maybes or in-betweens when it comes to this, with you, the reader. The townspeople question it, and they're taking sides, but you know the truth. And that is why I think you're supposed to be so frustrated along with Maya and her family, because in a way you bared witness to this event happening, and you have to watch as everyone calls Maya a liar and everything, but you can't say anything. Honestly, it was really refreshing and appreciated, because so many times when we talk about these things, people just want to be like, oh, well, maybe, we don't know, blah, 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 blah. We were there, and there's no gray area in this, and like, you are supposed to feel frustrated, I think. And then all of it leading to the town picking sides. And then at the end of the book, a bunch of the kids on the hockey team moving to the neighboring town and playing for their rival team. Whew, what a book. And I feel like I need to talk about with Maya and Kevin at the end of the book, where she takes an unloaded shotgun and holds it to Kevin's forehead. And in that moment, I had this pit in my stomach. Anytime there's like a gun involved in anything, it like heightens everything times a million. And I had this moment, and when she was like, you have to live with the fear that now I feel, because it was the only way to make him understand the fear that she has to carry around with her for the rest of her life. And that lingering pain, that thought in the back of her mind that will stay in his mind now forever. and how he will never forget, like, how close his life was to ending in that moment, even though there was technically no danger for him, right? Because she has to live with the rest of her life what he did to her. Now he has to live the rest of his life with the knowledge of that kind of fear that she caused him. And it was pretty powerful, I can't lie. And it still ends up with Maya having to kind of be a bigger person in a lot of ways. But I think very few people who have experienced this kind of horrible thing ever really get to face their attacker and make them understand how they feel. And in a way, she kind of got that moment, even if it's not in exactly the same way or anything like that. In that moment, he felt what she felt, or as close as she could get him to feel. And it was like her not redeeming herself, it was like her taking her power back in that moment. It's hard. This book is heavy, and it faces a lot of hard truths and reality. Is it a happy ending? In some ways, yeah. But in real life, life doesn't always have a perfectly happy ending either. It doesn't need to be a bad ending, but things don't always turn out exactly the way we want them to be. And then also thinking about how our choices affect the other people in our lives, affect everyone else in our lives, in our town, in our community. I don't know if I can call this book a masterpiece, but it's up there. It was truly something that has stuck with me. And that's why I read this book weeks ago. It's taken me so long to film this review because it still feels so raw in my body thinking about it. And I can't wait for the series to come out. I hope I can watch it when it does. Excited, again, feels like the wrong word, but I'm looking forward to seeing how they take this book and adapt it to the screen. And that is all I have for you today. If you watched this far into the video, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. If you enjoyed, please be sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel. It helps me out a ton. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I can't wait to see you in the next one.